Many years have passed since I undertook my experiment with the pauper children, taking them out of the workhouse and fostering them with local families. Boarding out, it was called. And I found it the most delightful and least costly mode of doing good. I can remember all their names and can still picture their faces and the families they went to. The Lincolnshire children under my care, Ellen Bussel, Samuel Ensor, Jane Hussell, the two brothers...
So, how did those local children end up in the workhouse? For most Lincolnshire farm workers in the 19th century, there was no such thing as a reliable income. Most agricultural labourers were hired by the day, and their work could be cancelled at a moment's notice, such as when it rained. Wages varied with the season and with the price of corn. There was no safety net from the welfare state and no national health service. Families could quickly and easily fall into poverty. Before 1834, local parishes cared for paupers through a variety of schemes, often in the form of outdoor relief, with food and money given to those at home. As ratepayers, local property owners funded much of this relief, and many were concerned that pauperism was eating up their wealth. In 1832, the Royal Commission investigated the existing poor laws. They concluded that rather than being the result of social and economic conditions, poverty and destitution arose from the immorality and idleness of the poor themselves. In reality, most poverty and destitution arose not from idleness, but from low wages, erratic employment, sickness, widowhood, and old age. The Poor Law Amendment Act became law in 1834. Provision was to be consistent across the country. Parishes were grouped into unions, overseen by a board of guardians, and each union had to provide a workhouse. Locally, this led to the Caistor Poor Law Union, which covered 76 parishes, and the sizable Caistor Workhouse. Outside relief officially stopped for the able-bodied. They could only get relief inside the workhouse. Inside, conditions were made deliberately harsh. Families were separated, and inmates were forced to do hard labour, live in poor conditions, and receive poor nutrition. While the aim had been to induce able-bodied men to work for their livings, in reality, workhouses soon became home to orphan children, the chronic sick, and infirm elderly, all of whom had nowhere else to turn. It became clear to many social reformers that the system needed to change. The desire to help workhouse children was taken up by many middle and upper-class women, including Louisa Boucherett, a member of a wealthy landowning family in North Willingham. She became a member of the Workhouse Visiting Society, established by Louisa Twining, daughter of a wealthy tea merchant, in 1858, and witnessed first-hand the miserable condition of children in the Caistor Workhouse. Inspired by the boarding-out schemes pioneered by Hannah Archer in Wiltshire, Louisa took it upon herself to begin boarding out in Lincolnshire.
In July 1863, I asked and obtained leave to take two girls, 12 and 14 years of age, out of the workhouse school of the district in which I then resided. Their physical condition I found to be very miserable. One had had a cough for 6 months and was very thin. Both were very unhealthy. Morally, these children were neither honest, truthful, cleanly, nor active. The result of my observations is that a child cannot be placed out too young if a suitable home can be found, and if the supervision be careful and efficient.
From that initial placement, Louisa became immersed in the scheme over several years, personally selecting host families, monitoring progress, and remaining vigilant for any sign of ill treatment. She gathered her knowledge into a paper prepared in 1870 for the Social Science Association, titled Practical Suggestions on Boarding Out in Answer to Many Inquiries.
I see that good-tempered, calm-looking women and men make the best foster parents. Those who are lively and excitable or over-anxious in character don't do well, however high-principled and well-intentioned, as all children require much patience and workhouse-bred ones more than others. When I sent a child to a cottage, I always looked at the accommodation, and sometimes, by merely putting up a wooden partition at the expense of a few shillings, I added greatly to the comfort of the whole family by giving the girls a separate room. Should any report arise of a child being ill-treated, it should be immediately inquired into, and the person who reported it to the proper authorities should be thanked, whether it proved true or not.
Louisa recommended the type of employment the children were trained for and the level of allowance families were paid. She was especially keen that girls develop skills that would enable them to earn a wage.
Needlework is often very wearisome to young girls, yet it is absolutely necessary that they should be good needlewomen, and it is best to accustom them to take a pride in their skill as early as possible. But care should be taken to prevent them from ever depending entirely on needlework for a maintenance, and therefore, as they grow older, I have been at much pains to have them taught to milk and to be handy with cattle, as a girl who can milk a cow and rear a calf is always sure of good employment at fair wages.
A letter from Louisa to the Caistor Guardians in 1869, reporting on the boys and girls in her care, gives a fascinating glimpse of the children and foster families involved in this pioneering Lincolnshire initiative.
Jane Hussell at Mrs. Towers of Linwood, aged 13, is still so small and short owing to a natural defect as to make it necessary to continue the allowance for some time longer. But as she has improved considerably of late in strength and stature, I hope she will ultimately be fit for service in a tradesman's, if not a farmer's, family. Ellen Bussel at Mrs. Prescott's at Legsby is now 11 years old and handy for her age, likely to make a good servant at the usual age of 12 or 13 at furthest. Emily Phillips is still with Mrs. Sanders at Tealby. This child was at first exceedingly troublesome, but I've heard no complaints of her for a long time past. She is 11 years of age, likely, I hope, to do as well as those already in service. Louisa Charlotte Phillips, sister to the above, is 9 years old. This child had a most serious illness, having been for some time deprived of the use of her limbs. The guardians will be pleased to hear that Mrs. Flower nursed the child with the greatest care and tenderness, and is now rewarded by seeing her convalescent. Cecilia is now at Mrs. Boardman's at Market Rasen, under whose judicious care she is improving rapidly. She is 11 years of age and is likely to be fit for service next year. George Carr at Mr. Robinson's farm at Legsby, 11 years of age, is growing handy for his years. William Carr, his brother, at Mrs. Buxton's, 13 years of age, is less satisfactory, as might have been expected, as he was older when he left the workhouse. Samuel Ensor, 9 years of age, at John Bray's, labourer of Tealby, doing well at school and will go to work this summer. Thomas Russell, 12 years of age, has been maintaining himself in farmer's service since Michaelmas. William French, aged 16, has 8 shillings and 10pence wages, is a very satisfactory lad and promises to do very well.
During the 6-year period that she administered the scheme, Louisa found placements for 25 children. In 1869, Louisa notified the Caistor Guardians that the scheme needed a new manager, as her residence at Willingham was likely to become irregular.
I cannot help asking whether the board does not think that the experiment has so far succeeded as to require, in the interest of the children and ratepayers, that it should be no longer dependent upon an individual, but should now be adopted as part of the system of the Union. I do venture to express the hope that the board will now place the system on a permanent footing.
And by 1878 this indeed happened. The scheme was formally adopted at Caistor and ran until at least 1917. But by then, boarding out was far more than a local story. In May 1870, Louisa and a number of other national campaigners, including Florence Davenport Hill and Frances Power Cobb, met with the Right Honourable Mr. Goshen, President of the Poor Law Board at Parliament. They recommended local women could act as trustees and guardians for such children in their area, a proposal heavily influenced by the role performed by Louisa in Lincolnshire. The Poor Law Board agreed to a wider trial of the scheme and issued a formal framework, the Boarding Out Order, in 1870. By the end of the 19th century, around half the unions in England and Wales were using boarding out, with around 8,000 children placed in homes. The practice is the forerunner of the system of foster care still used today. And what of the Caistor Workhouse? It became an institution for people with a variety of disabilities in the 1930s, then an NHS hospital from 1948 to 1990. A serious fire in 2001 meant many of the buildings had to be demolished. Today, a housing estate occupies the site, with the last workhouse building, St Lawrence's Chapel, being demolished in 2018. Louisa and her sister Jessie are buried alongside their mother, Louisa Boucherett, at St Thomas the Apostle Church, North Willingham, in the Lincolnshire Wolds. The church was rebuilt in 1777 in the classical Georgian style by Caistor Workhouse, Louisa and Jessie's grandfather.
Thomas Russell, Anne Whiteland, William Carr.